Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure this morning to welcome Professor Keir Lieber, professor in our School of Foreign Service and Government Department, and the director of our Center for Security Studies and our Security Studies program. So Keir, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. It's great to have this opportunity to hear from you and learn more about your scholarship and your leadership. Let's just jump right in. You've led very important research on nuclear weapons over the years, including deterrence, technology, strategy, and policy. Can you tell us about how you came to focus your scholarship on this topic and what makes it such an important and rich area of study?
Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to talk to you. This is terrific. I cherish any human interaction, whether virtual or not at this point. That question is a great question. It's something I've been thinking a lot about, how I got to be here. I guess when you turn 50, you start to look in the rearview mirror a lot more than in the past, and you tend to look further back. And I think there are at least two kind of formative experiences for me in terms of my professional engagement and substantive engagement. But they go back to the 1980s. And my experience of growing up in DC. I think they're both relevant. I'll explain exactly how. The first is, just kind of how I got here. Why did I decide to just study international relations? How did I end up writing a book about nuclear weapons? The first is, again, I was a product of the DC public schools in the 1980s. This is the era of, pretty bad crime and Marion Barry, but it was an exciting time in DC. What I always say to my students in my large introduction to international relations class is that everything I learned about international relations, I now realize I learned on the blacktop of Alice Deal Junior High School and at my senior high school, which is Woodrow Wilson School, which is going to be renamed soon, I think for very good reasons. But I think about the times out on the playground at recess. It's probably why they no longer have recess anymore, but it was a little bit of Lord of the Flies, right? It was when the principal or the teachers were inside, what happened on the blacktop and on the fields was in some ways comparable, believe this or not, to international relations where there's no common world government, right? So the question was, how do we manage this? How do we get along? How do we interact? And DC at the time, again, in the public school system, very diverse, both racially, economically. You had international students or diplomats, children, but you had Salvadorian immigrants, a majority Black, obviously, at the time. And it was a real kind of, I wouldn't say free for all. The question was, how was order maintained on the playground? And just think about it. Here's where I came to the ideas of balance of power and brute power. Yet norms were in existence. Where did those norms come from? What was kosher? What was not kosher to do? We had institutions. I mean, that's what alliances are, right? And so, having been involved in my fair share of brush-ups, I quickly learned to figure out how the world worked and what the different forces were. And again, I don't want to, in hindsight, this all makes sense, but my interest in international relations in particular, and the implications of how states get along, countries get along in a world without, the principle on the playground, I think I've drawn a lot from that. More and more over the years, I realized that. The second formative experience was also from the 1980s, and growing up a rabid Georgetown Hoyas basketball fan. And everybody who knows this, I just recently read Big John's book. And so all this is just fresh in my mind. I remember so much, but the conventional wisdom at the time, right in the early 80s, in particular, mid 80s, that somehow we were the bad guys, that John Thompson was racist because we didn't have white players on our team. This national conventional wisdom that at the time made no sense to me. How could you possibly say that? This is the era in which up till Patrick Ewing's final game in the championship against Villanova, people were throwing banana peels on the floor. And we're the racists? John Thompson having white recruits not come to Georgetown because they were told they were just going to be a token and that Thompson was racist. All this was crazy to me. And this is a long way of saying challenging conventional wisdom, right? Why is it that there are these theories out there that seem to just contradict facts and evidence was something that really motivated me at the time. And now, again, in hindsight, I see that kind of in my own work, as maybe we'll talk about with my book. I mean, I felt more inclined to question authority, challenge dominant arguments, perceived truths. And there are a lot of those in international relations, U.S. foreign policy, nuclear weapons, et cetera.
Sure. Well, let's connect it to your new book. You co-authored a book that was released this past year with Professor Daryl Press, entitled The Myth of the Nuclear Revolution, Power Politics, and the Atomic Age. Among other things, the book explores why even in this period of our nuclear age, security competition continues. So tell us a little more about the book and some of the arguments and issues you explore in it.
Sure. I mean, again, here's a dominant conventional wisdom, at least in the international relations, in academia and scholarship, the notion that nuclear weapons are an incredible deterrent to war, right? If I have them and you have them, you're not going to attack me because I'll retaliate with nuclear weapons. I'm not going to attack you because you'll retaliate with nuclear weapons against me. So it makes war, obsolete in a way. And if war is obsolete, again, according to this theory, the dominant kind of theory of nuclear weapons in the academy, and in many ways in policymaking circles, we shouldn't even compete. Why bother competing for more power, for allies, for anything, if we're never going to fight each other? And the reason we wrote this book was that I looked out at the real world and said, wait a minute, why are nuclear powers, great powers, major powers like the United States and China, even India and Pakistan who have nuclear weapons, why are they competing so intensely? So that was the puzzle of the book. Thus the title, The Myth of the Nuclear Revolution. And our answer, was essentially that we need to explain why that competition is enduring. It can't be that every leader doesn't understand how nuclear weapons work in international politics. And so the chapters run through a series of arguments to explain that puzzle, the great puzzle of the nuclear age. And it has a lot to do with traditional notions of competition. It's hard to get to a place where you can stalemate each other with enough nuclear weapons, et cetera. You're always worried that the other side is going to try and escape that stalemate. You might be interested in escaping it yourself. And of course, there's finally a wicked problem about deterring conventional war. If I'm a conventionally weaker power, just the old traditional tanks and aircraft and all the rest, but I have nuclear weapons, if we fight a conventional war, I'm going to lose that war. And therefore, using nuclear weapons in a way to deter that conflict from happening in the first place makes a lot of sense. And I think it bears a lot on contemporary challenges for the United States as it faces some conventionally inferior nuclear armed states. So I'm not surprised that competition endures, and I'm trying to help explain that.
So you are an expert in nuclear deterrence and in the ways in which nuclear policy can decrease the threat of nuclear warfare. As a new administration takes over in the White House, what are some of the priorities and considerations you hope for in the next few years?
Well, I should say it's an interesting issue because in most areas of international relations, foreign policy, and much less domestic policy, I view the past administration as basically criminally incompetent. But on the nuclear side, the folks that were running nuclear policy in the Defense Department, State Department, elsewhere, National Security Council, were actually way above the bar compared to others in the administration in making sober, intelligent policy. North Korea, Iran, basically disastrous policies. So those are the areas where I look to now. I'm confident that the Biden administration will behave fairly moderately on a lot of things. My biggest concern, which is a concern during the Trump administration, and it's a concern now, is what we do. Again, if we get involved in a military conflict with North Korea, the incentive for North Korea to use its nuclear weapons to bring a halt to that war, that conflict, before it's too late, is going to be enormous. I mean, they know what Gaddafi decided not to pursue nuclear weapons, and we know what happened to him. Saddam Hussein abandoned his nuclear program. We know what happened to him, right? You don't want to lose a conventional war to Uncle Sam, okay? And we understood that back in the Cold War when we were conventionally weaker, and our solution was to rely on nuclear weapons to deter the Soviet Union from invading Western Europe. North Korea faces similar incentives today. So I'm terrified about a conventional conflict getting going, because then I worry about the escalation pressure. So my number one priority is avoid war with North Korea and Iran. I understand why Iran wants nuclear weapons. I like the Iran deal. I hope we can return to that. I'd like to prevent them from getting nuclear weapons, but I certainly wouldn't want to go to war to accomplish that. So my view is keep the peace as much as possible.
Tell us about your role as director of our Center for Security Studies. The center offers a comprehensive master's degree program focused on security studies, has prepared hundreds of alumni to become leaders in analysis, policy, and scholarship. As director, what are you focused on in the center in this current moment? What are some of the priorities or issues that are forefront of mind for you as you prepare our security studies students to lead in this moment in history?
Yeah, well, like everybody else, navigating the pandemic has basically been priority number one. But we're doing it in a way that we're trying to stay on top. I'll just be honest. I believe that we have the best security studies program in the world. And so our goal is to continue to recruit the very best students, the very best faculty, to empower the staff to run a program that is already tremendously successful. Beyond that, but still in pretty broad strokes, I want to maintain a laser-like focus on the bringing theory to bear on the most vital real world security challenges. And there are many, from the rise of China and the implications for US-Chinese relations, to India, Pakistan, nuclear deterrence, to terrorism, to global climate change, to Arctic competition. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And we keep adding courses to address this, and faculty that are the best in the world at what they do. So those are the things that we're doing. I would say, though, even though the pandemic looms the largest, what I'm focused on a lot recently is our attempt to diversify both the security studies program but also in the longer term, the national security establishment here in the U.S. I'm proud of our DEI initiatives in SSP, as we're doing in many other units here at the university. I'll just be completely honest. The national security establishment has traditionally been dominantly white, dominantly male. It doesn't really matter what the causes of that are. I think it's a problem. And I think it's a problem because if you inevitably have a lack of diverse viewpoints, diverse experiences, and that hinders critical debate, discussion, dialogue. Again, the whole point is to have critical debates about theories, and then those point to responses to real world policy challenges. If you're not getting a diversity of viewpoints at that first part, and it tends to be homogenous based on background and all the rest, then we're not going to produce students who will go on to be the next generation leaders. So the goal has to be to foster a more inclusive space in our own program where all kinds of folks are willing to speak up, to challenge and debate, kind of dominant hegemonic arguments. It goes back to, again, the very beginning. Somebody needs to speak out to challenge the notion that, Georgetown, Hoya paranoia, was some unfounded, nefarious, force. And again, it was good to be number one too. That always helps. But look, we have in the SSP and the Center for Security Studies, we have a great opportunity. This is not a problem to navigate. This is a real opportunity to act in a way that will improve American foreign policy, because we are a major feeder of the next generation of talent into the intelligence world, national security establishment. So I think we have a unique responsibility to contribute to greater diversity in this field, in this area.
Thank you. Now, many of our community members might know that you're not the only Professor Lieber at Georgetown. Your father, Bob Lieber, joined our faculty in 1982 and has been a long-serving professor of government, now a member of our emeritus faculty. Can you share a little bit about what it's like to share this experience with your father?
It's again, another topic that's been on my mind for years. It's both incredible and a little strange. I mean, when I look over, I've got my pro basketball programs from the 1981-82 and 82-83 season. I would spend hours on the weekends at Yates and walking over to the pub in Healy to get a burger. I spent a lot of time on this campus. And even if my father weren't here when I returned after getting tenure at University of Notre Dame, it would have been a strange experience to come home like that. But I have to say it was, and I had major hesitation about this, not least because it's not like my father was ever afraid to have arguments with people on campus. So I wondered, hey, am I going to be associated with Bob Lieber's views on things? I was encouraged because I disagree with him so much on a lot of substantive issues. I have the scars from high school dinners to show it, but it was an amazing experience to come home to Georgetown, in part because of some of the nice things people said about my father. And those conversations would always begin with, I disagree with your father often, but I respect his views. There's a lot of integrity, and his take on the kind of purpose of academia to foster a world in which we are sifting and winnowing of ideas, again, clashing critical thought, which will produce better policies and more knowledge, I think was inspiring. It's a little weird. It was a little weird to be walking into meetings where I would see him and he'd be very proud and all the rest. But I'm incredibly grateful for the opportunity to have overlapped with him. Again, you said he's emeritus now. Still calling me all the time to talk about campus politics and department politics, but I feel incredibly lucky to have shared this campus with him at this time of career for a few years. It's been terrific.
Oh, Keir, thank you. And thank you for everything that you do here at the university and for your leadership. In closing, is there a message you'd like to share with our community?
I'm not big on big visionary statements. I guess I'll return to some of the themes that we've talked about. And mainly this is to the students, current and future students, but also adults who are still open-minded enough. This is a rough time in our nation, really, to talk about politics and brotherly love and respectful dialogue and all the rest. But I would urge students in particular this is the time to be active. This is the time to speak up. There are a lot of, I think, again, wrong conventional wisdoms out there, nefarious, dominant arguments. And if you think you're right and you've done your work, done your research, and you can't be afraid to speak out, even if you're a lone voice. Again, I think back to John Thompson's book, and the arriving at Georgetown as a 6'10" black man in the 1970s. I mean, he was willing to call it like he saw it. And that should be an inspiring thing for everyone. I'll tell you this, it's not easy, right? Because sometimes you're wrong, as we all have to admit. You might be wrong, be aware of that. But if you think you're right, and you think you have the arguments, and you think everybody else is just going along with the herd, it can be an incredibly empowering and intellectually fulfilling exercise to challenge that. You get scared, you got to speak up. But if you don't, who will? Again, remember, you might be wrong. The other side might be wrong. You got to love one another. We're in this together. Again, that's hard for me to say, given some of my fellow citizens and their political leanings these days, but we are all in this together, and we need to treat each other with the respect, even as we confront arguments that we think are wrong.
Keir, thank you. It's been a pleasure to have this time with you, and I'm grateful for your scholarship, your terrific leadership in our academic community, and thanks for being here today.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate the opportunity.
And I look forward to being with all of you again soon. Take care of yourselves and take care of everyone around you. For every Hoya, everywhere.